Racist. Cop threatens prison time. After illegally arresting, black federal judge ends his own career. You think that fancy suit means something out here, boy? Let me tell you exactly what is going to happen to you tonight. I'm going to make one phone call to the DA, and you are going to disappear into a concrete box for the next 3 years. Let's see how smart you talk from a holding cell. Those words did not slip out by accident. They were not the product of a misunderstanding or a bad judgment call made in the rain. They were delivered the way a man delivers something he has said many times before, low and certain and absolutely confident, the way a person speaks when they have never once been told they were wrong. Officer Derek Stafford of the Crestwood Heights Police Department stood on the shoulder of Millbrook Road, his hand gripping the collar of a 64-year-old man in a soaking charcoal overcoat, and he said those words like they were policy. The man receiving those words did not flinch. He did not beg. He did not raise his voice. He simply turned his head slowly and looked Derek Stafford directly in the eyes with a stillness so complete, so patient, so ancient in its discipline that Stafford's hand actually loosened on the collar for just a fraction of a second before his ego swallowed the hesitation whole. That stillness should have been a warning. It wasn't. Because what Officer Derek Stafford did not know could not have imagined and would spend the rest of his life wishing he had understood was that the man he had just dragged from a legally parked car on a fabricated traffic violation, the man he had just handcuffed with the steel ratcheted deliberately tight, the man he had just threatened with 3 years in a concrete box was the Honorable Marcus Elias Webb, a sitting article, 3 federal judge of the United States District Court, appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate, and the single most dangerous person Derek Stafford had ever put in handcuffs. Within 11 minutes of arriving at the Crestwood Heights Police Department that night, Marcus Webb would begin dismantling everything Derek Stafford had ever built, starting with his badge, continuing with his freedom, and ending with the permanent collapse of the only identity Stafford had ever known. Before we go any further, drop your city in the comments right now. People from all over this country need to hear this story tonight. And if you believe that no badge, no uniform, and no amount of arrogance should ever put an innocent man in handcuffs in the rain, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like right now. Because what comes next is something you are absolutely not going to want to miss. Now let's go back to how this night began. It was a Wednesday night in late October, and the rain had been falling since mid-afternoon. Not the dramatic kind of rain that announces itself with thunder. The quiet, relentless kind that simply arrives and refuses to leave, turning every road into a dark mirror and pushing the temperature into the kind of cold that gets through wool and settles into the bone. Crestwood Heights sits on the outer ring of a major Midwestern city. It is the kind of town that takes quiet, serious pride in its own appearance. The medians on the main boulevard are replanted with fresh flowers twice a year. The Homeowners Association sends letters about lawn length. The local police department is funded at a level that has absolutely nothing to do with the town's actual crime statistics. The streets are wide, well-lit, and heavily patrolled. Residents will tell you it is simply a very safe community. They rarely examine too closely why it feels safe, or for whom. The Honorable Marcus Elias Webb had not chosen to drive through Crestwood Heights that night. He would never choose this route after dark if any other option existed. Not because he feared it, but because he was 64 years old, and the calculation required to navigate towns like this one had grown exhausting in a way that only people who have lived it can fully understand. He was in his dark navy Cadillac CT5, maintained with the same quiet discipline he applied to everything in his life. He wore his charcoal wool overcoat over a pressed white shirt, no tie collar open. He had spent 11 hours presiding over a federal racketeering trial. A complex, grinding, exhausting day. All he wanted was to get home. At 64, Marcus Webb wore his age the way certain men carry authority. Not as a burden, not as a performance. As something earned and settled and entirely at peace with itself. Silver hair trimmed close. Wire frame glasses sitting precisely on the bridge of his nose. Hands on the steering wheel steady and deliberate. the hands of a man who had spent 40 years making decisions in courtrooms that altered other people's lives permanently. A highway accident 3 miles east had forced a detour. His GPS, with no awareness of the social geography of American suburbs, rerouted him straight through Crestwood Heights, through Elm Ridge Drive, through Millbrook Road, through a town he had deliberately avoided for reasons that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with surviving it. He drove at 27 miles per hour in a 30 zone. He signaled a full block before every turn. His registration was current. His insurance was current. Every light on the car was functioning perfectly. The only thing unusual about his presence on Millbrook Road that night was something he could not change and would not have changed even if he could. He knew the unwritten rules. He had been knowing them since before Derek Stafford was born. The parking lot of the shuttered dry cleaner on Millbrook Road had become, without any official designation, a regular resting spot for Crestwood Heights Patrol Unit 4. On this particular Wednesday night, that unit was occupied by Officer Derek Stafford, 36 years old, 9-year veteran, sitting with the engine idling a half-eaten protein bar on the console and the kind of restless, territorial attention that some people direct toward a job they have confused with a personality. Stafford was not a complicated man, but he was a consequential one. He had built his reputation not through exceptional work, but through volume and aggression. Through a willingness to stop, detain, and intimidate at a pace that his supervisors privately found useful, because it kept the numbers up, and that his colleagues found reassuring because it confirmed a worldview they all quietly shared. 9 years, 12 formal complaints, excessive force, improper detention, discriminatory stops, every single one reviewed internally, every single one dismissed. His sergeant had once described him in a performance review as a little rough around the edges, but effective. That description had functioned as permission for everything that followed. Stafford saw himself as a guardian. He used that word without irony. He was the last line between the order that Crestwood Heights residents paid significant property taxes to maintain and the disorder that he was certain was always pressing in from the city. He had a talent, or so he claimed, for spotting people who did not belong. What he had in reality was a bias so deeply embedded by 9 years of zero consequences that he could no longer distinguish it from instinct. He saw the dark navy Cadillac turn onto Millbrook Road, and his eyes narrowed before he consciously decided to look twice. The car was clean, current plates, properly signaling, moving at a legal speed, giving him absolutely nothing. But the driver was visible in profile under the street lamps, an older black man in a coat driving carefully through a neighborhood that Stafford had spent 9 years deciding was not for people who looked like that. He pulled out of the lot without activating his lights and fell in behind the Cadillac. His fingers drummed once on the wheel. He was going to find something. He always found something. And if he did not find something, he was going to find a reason. In Crestwood Heights, for Derek Stafford, there had never been a meaningful difference between the two. Marcus saw the headlights in his mirror at the first intersection. A cold, familiar heaviness settled in his chest. Not quite fear, not quite surprise. A form of recognition so old and so thoroughly incorporated into the structure of his daily life that he registered it the way he registered weather, as a condition to be managed rather than a feeling to be processed. He checked his speedometer. 27. He checked his lane position. Perfect center. He signaled early for the next turn and waited. For 1 minute and 40 seconds, Stafford followed the Cadillac and found nothing. Not a tire drift, not a rolling stop, not a signal given a half-second late. Marcus drove with the deliberate, unhurried precision of a man who has spent his entire adult life knowing he might be watched, which is to say, he drove flawlessly. This infuriated Stafford, because in his logic the absence of an infraction was not evidence that nothing was wrong. It was evidence that the driver knew how to hide it. He keyed his radio. His voice was flat and practiced. "Dispatch. This is Unit 4. Initiating a traffic stop on a dark navy Cadillac, late model current. Illinois plates, Millbrook Road heading north. Possible failure to maintain lane window tint concerns suspicious vehicle behavior. Copy. The dispatcher copied. Stafford hit the switch. The night exploded in red and blue. Inside the Cadillac, Marcus Webb let out one slow, controlled breath. He pulled over immediately. Smoothly, perfectly. He guided the car onto the shoulder beneath a functioning street lamp, shifted into park, cut the engine, rolled down the window. Then, acting on survival protocols so deeply ingrained they required no thought whatsoever, he placed both hands flat on the top of the steering wheel at 10 and 2 fingers spread and visible, and he waited. The rain drummed steadily on the roof. In his side mirror, Marcus watched Stafford climb out of the cruiser and take his time. The officer adjusted his duty belt slowly, aimed his high-powered flashlight directly into Marcus's side mirror to disorient him, then began the deliberate walk toward the driver's door with the unhurried swagger of a man who has done this performance many times and found it satisfying. As he approached, Stafford unclipped the retention strap on his holster. Not for safety. There was no threat. It was theater. A physical vocabulary of dominance directed at a 64-year-old man sitting with his hands on the wheel, and it communicated exactly what it was intended to communicate. I have power over this moment, and you do not, Evening Stafford said. Flat. Barely a greeting. More a territorial marker. He kept the flashlight aimed directly at Marcus's eyes. Do you know why I pulled you over tonight? Good evening, Officer Marcus replied. His voice was a deep, unhurried baritone. It carried none of the nervous compression that fear produces in people who understand they are being evaluated. He sounded exactly the way a man sounds who has testified before Senate subcommittees ruled on billion-dollar cases and stared down organized crime attorneys across a federal bench for over a decade. Entirely, composedly, and somewhat impressively unintimidated. I confess I am not certain why you stopped me. I was traveling at 27 miles per hour. My registration is current. My vehicle is in complete working order. I signaled well in advance of every turn. Perhaps you could help me understand. Stafford's jaw tightened. He did not like the vocabulary. He did not like the cadence. He did not like the absence of the nervous flutter that told him he was in control. He leaned slightly closer to the window and swept the flashlight over the interior of the Cadillac. Clean leather seats, spotless dashboard, a leather briefcase on the passenger seat. Nothing. He looked harder, looking for something to use. You swerved back there, Stafford said. And he said it without hesitation, without any discomfort at the straightforward untruth of it. Failure to maintain your lane. Also, your window tint looks dark to me. Might be illegal. Where are you headed tonight, buddy? The word was deliberate. Not sir. Buddy. A word chosen to strip away the register of respect that Marcus's voice had established and replace it with something smaller, something that said, I decide what you are called here, and I have decided you are not worth a title. I am heading home. Officer Marcus replied, absorbing the slight without visible reaction. There is an accident back up on the interstate, and my navigation system routed me through this area. I am simply in transit. Whose car is this? Stafford asked, as if Marcus had not just clearly stated he was heading home. It is my vehicle, officer. License and registration, Stafford said. The tone dropped, harder now. My license is in my wallet in my left interior jacket pocket, Marcus said, announcing each movement before making it. My registration is in the glove compartment. With your permission, I will reach for them now. Stafford was briefly, almost invisibly thrown by this. The hyper-procedural compliance, the legal precision, it did not match what 9 years of practice had written. He recovered quickly. Just get the license. Hands where I can see them. Marcus reached slowly into his jacket, retrieved his wallet, and extracted his license with the careful visibility of a man who has spent decades making certain his hands are always exactly where everyone can see them. He handed it through the window. Stafford snatched it, shone his light on the laminate. Marcus E. Webb, he read aloud. He looked from the card to the face. You live in the city. Long way from home, Marcus. Not Mr. Webb. Marcus. As I mentioned, I was rerouted. What do you do for work, Marcus? The first name again, deliberate and consistent. Marcus registered it and filed it without changing his expression. He had been a public defender, an appellate attorney, an assistant U.S. attorney, and a federal judge. He understood exactly the difference between the moment to act and the moment to wait. This was a moment to wait. I work in the federal court system, he said carefully. Federal court system. Stafford scoffed. What? Like a clerk? A paralegal? He shone the light into the back seat again. Looking. Always looking. I've got a rash of residential burglaries in this sector. High-end properties, pattern of vehicles coming in from the city drivers casing the homes. You fit the description. Marcus looked at him steadily. Officer, I am 64 years old. I am wearing a wool overcoat. I have been driving at 27 miles per hour. Does it genuinely appear to you that I am casing homes in a rainstorm? Don't get smart with me, boy. The word dropped into the wet air between them like something thrown from a height. Not shouted, casual, almost reflexive. The word of a habit, not an outburst. The word of a man who has used it before without consequence and expects to use it again the same way. Something shifted in Marcus Webb's face. Not a collapse, not an eruption, a subtraction. The last residue of professional patience simply left his expression quietly and completely replaced by something absolute. The expression of a man who has just confirmed something he already knew and who has decided as of this moment exactly how he is going to respond to it. I would strongly suggest, Marcus said, his voice dropping half an octave, that you reconsider your tone, officer. I would also suggest that you run my license issue a citation if you genuinely believe a violation occurred and allow me to continue on my way. You do not have a reasonable articulable suspicion sufficient to detain me beyond the scope of a routine traffic stop. I believe you are aware of that. Stafford stepped back. Genuine shock moved across his face for one full second. Then it curdled into fury, hot, reflexive, entirely immune to reason. Step out of the car, he said. At the intersection, 40 yards back, a white sedan sat at a red light with its wipers going. Behind the wheel was Rachel Simmons, 38 years old, a physical therapist heading home after an evening at her sister's house. She had seen the lights go on behind the Cadillac and thought nothing of it at first. But as she sat waiting for the light, she watched the scene on the shoulder, and something in the posture of the interaction began to feel wrong in a way she could not immediately name. The man in the car had his hands on the wheel. She could see that clearly. He was not moving. He was not aggressive. He was just sitting still, speaking calmly to an officer who was leaning into his window with a flashlight in his face. And the officer's body language, the lean of his shoulders, the hand near his belt, communicated something that had nothing to do with a routine stop. Rachel was not someone who thought of herself as a person who gets involved in things. She was someone who paid attention, and what she was paying attention to right now felt like something she should not look away from. She picked up her phone from the cup holder, opened her camera, and started recording through the rain-streaked passenger window. She said quietly to herself, "Something is very wrong here." Across the intersection, at a 24-hour gas station on the east corner, Leo Garza, 31 years old, was standing at pump 3 with his jacket collar turned up against the rain. He saw the flashing lights. He watched for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and opened Instagram Live with the automatic instinct of someone who grew up documenting the world as it happened. He said into the camera, "I don't know what's going on here, but y'all need to see this." He pointed the phone at the scene on the shoulder of Millbrook Road and let the image speak for itself. A well-dressed older black man in a nice coat, hands visible at all times, being talked at aggressively by an officer with a flashlight in his face. 6 viewers. Then 12. Then the number kept climbing. Neither Rachel nor Leo knew who Marcus Webb was. They were not recording a federal judge. They were recording a pattern they recognized, and they understood each in their own way that recognition was not nothing. Back at the car window, Stafford had his order on the table. "Step out of the vehicle," he said again. "Now." "On what specific legal grounds are you asking me to exit the vehicle?" Marcus asked. The same measured voice, the same unhurried precision. He was not stalling. He was building a record verbally in real time, the way a man builds a record who has spent 40 years understanding that records are what survive when everything else is contested. Stafford unholstered his taser with his left hand. The red laser dot appeared on Marcus's chest, small and exact, a vivid point of light on the dark wool of the overcoat. Marcus looked at it. Then he looked at the shaking anger in Stafford's eyes. And he made a calculation, the same calculation black men in this country have been making in moments exactly like this one, because he had presided over the civil wrongful death. Cases had read the depositions, had heard the testimony of the families, and he knew, with clinical precision, how this script ended for men who refused to comply. "I am complying," he said quietly. "I am turning off the ignition. I am unbuckling my seatbelt. I am opening the door slowly." He stepped out into the rain. The cold hit him instantly. Marcus Webb stood at his full height of 6 feet 1 inch and looked down at Derek Stafford, and he said nothing because nothing was required. His stillness in that moment communicated everything that mattered. "I know exactly what you are doing, and I know exactly what it will cost you, and I am going to stand right here in this rain and let you finish doing it." "Turn around," Stafford barked. "Hands on the roof. Spread your feet." Marcus turned slowly, placed both palms flat against the wet roof of the Cadillac, and spread his feet. Stafford moved in and kicked his ankles further apart with a force that went far beyond any reasonable interpretation of officer safety. Marcus's right foot slipped slightly on the wet pavement. He caught himself, steadied himself, said nothing. Stafford began the pat-down with aggressive thoroughness, up the legs, across the waist, up the sides. Then he reached into Marcus's coat pockets and pulled out the contents one by one. Keys, a Waterman fountain pen, a small leather notebook, and tossed each of them carelessly onto the wet hood of the cruiser behind them, where they slid and scattered in the rain. "Where are the drugs?" Stafford said, his voice close to Marcus's ear. "There are no drugs," Marcus replied. His voice was low and steady beneath the noise of the storm. "There are no weapons. There is no stolen property. You do not have probable cause for this search. I have not consented to it. What you are conducting right now is an illegal search under the Fourth Amendment." "I don't need your consent," Stafford sneered. He wrenched Marcus's arms back behind him with a sudden violent torque. A bolt of white-hot pain exploded through Marcus's right shoulder, tearing at the rotator cuff. He winced. He gritted his teeth. He did not cry out. "You're under arrest," Stafford said. "For what specific crime resisting a lawful order?" Stafford reached for his handcuffs. "Obstructing an investigation." He laughed lightly. "I'll think of a few more on the drive-in." He said it almost cheerfully, the way someone mentions they'll pick up milk on the way home. And that lightness communicated more clearly than anything else that had happened in the previous 10 minutes that Stafford was not operating within the law. He was operating within a long personal history of doing whatever he wanted and facing no consequences for it whatsoever. And at this particular moment he had absolutely no reason to believe tonight would be any different. The handcuffs went on. Stafford ratcheted them down deliberately tighter than any functional safety requirement would justify until the steel was pressing against the bone and Marcus's hands were going numb. Marcus gritted his teeth behind closed lips and said nothing about it. He was not going to give Stafford a single thing he was looking for tonight. Not one thing. Stafford grabbed Marcus by the collar of his overcoat and marched him toward the cruiser. And during that short walk through the rain, those 20 feet of wet asphalt between the Cadillac and the police car, he delivered the threat that would, in a very direct and measurable way, end his life as he knew it. He leaned close to Marcus's ear and spoke in a low, practiced voice. He said people like Marcus came into his town thinking their nice cars and fancy suits made them something, thinking they could talk down to him. He said he was going to call the DA in the morning, that he knew the right people, that he was going to push for a felony charge. He said he wanted Marcus sweating in county lockup all weekend before he even saw an attorney. He used the words city trash like they were familiar in his mouth, and then he said it clearly with full articulation so there could be no later claim of ambiguity. "You're looking at 3 years in a concrete box," Stafford said. "Let's see how articulate you are in there." Marcus stopped walking. With his hands bound behind his back in the cold rain on the shoulder of Millbrook Road, he planted his feet on the wet asphalt, and he stopped, and he turned his head, and he looked Derek Stafford directly in the eyes. The look lasted about 3 seconds. It was not anger. It was not despair. It was absolute, undecorated clarity. The look of a man who has just confirmed something he already knew and who has decided exactly how he is going to respond to it. The quality of that look was such that Stafford's grip on the collar loosened for the second time tonight, that same involuntary hesitation passing through him again before his ego covered for it. Marcus spoke quietly. The rain nearly swallowed the words, but not quite. "Officer Stafford," he said, "I want you to remember every word you just said, every fabricated charge, every specific threat. I want you to remember all of it. Because by the time the sun rises tomorrow morning, the life that you are currently living will be entirely, permanently, and irreversibly over." Stafford recovered. His ego, which had not failed him in 9 years, swallowed the hesitation and replaced it with fury. He shoved Marcus hard between the shoulder blades, driving him into the side of the cruiser. Marcus's head connected with the door frame with a sound audible over the rain. He collapsed forward into the back seat, his bound arms twisted beneath him, his shoulders screaming, his head ringing. The door slammed behind him. 40 yards back, Rachel Simmons had filmed the shove. She inhaled sharply. Her hand had not moved. She said quietly, "Oh my God, that is going up right now." And it did. Her footage uploaded to Twitter with a single caption, "Oakmont Hills area cop just put a well-dressed elderly black man in handcuffs in the rain and shoved his head into the car door. Something is very wrong. Watch." At the gas station, Leo Garza's Instagram Live had 43 viewers when the door slammed. He looked into the camera and said, "Did y'all just see that?" He turned toward his passenger in the car who had come out to see. He said, "Somebody with a platform needs to find this video tonight." Neither of them knew who Marcus Webb was. They had no idea. They were recording a pattern, and the pattern was already moving. Inside the back seat of the cruiser, Marcus sat upright against the hard plastic with his wrists bleeding slightly where the steel had cut in his shoulder, radiating pain with every breath, and his head throbbing dully from the impact with the door frame. He did not rage. The fury inside him was real. It had been real from the moment Stafford said that word on the shoulder of Millbrook Road. But it was contained within a structure that decades of discipline had built around it, and it burned there without consuming him fuel rather than fire. He thought about the briefcase on the front seat. Stafford had grabbed it from the passenger seat of the Cadillac and tossed it in front without any awareness of what it contained. Inside that briefcase were the sentencing guidelines, the annotated case history, and the preliminary ruling notes for United States versus Callaway and Associates, a federal wire fraud case, 11 defendants, $47 million. A case Marcus was scheduled to continue presiding over the following morning at 9 a.m. Those documents were now in the custody of a man who had just committed at minimum illegal search and seizure fabrication of evidence assault under color of law and deprivation of civil rights under federal statute. He had decided back at the car window not to use his title as a shield. He believed with the conviction of someone who has spent 40 years thinking seriously about what justice means, that the law ought to function identically for every citizen regardless of status. If it only worked correctly for people who could prove their importance, it did not actually work correctly at all. He had wanted to experience completely, and without protection, exactly what a black man without a federal credential would face on that shoulder tonight. He had experienced it, all of it, every single word of it, but there was a difference between using the title as a shield and using it as a sword. And the time for the sword was coming. He watched the windshield wipers moving in their steady rhythm through the partition glass, counting time. And he breathed. And he waited. The word that Stafford had used at the car window had opened a door into a corridor of memory that Marcus knew by heart. He was 21 years old. Late November. An Ohio State Highway gray light, flat above the fields, driving his mother's 1984 Buick Century back to Columbus after Thanksgiving. On the passenger seat beside him, a property law casebook, dog-eared, annotated, 3 months into his first year at law school. A Hardin County sheriff's deputy pulled him over on Route 30, no stated reason. When the deputy appeared at the window, he looked at the casebook on the passenger seat. He looked at Marcus. He said, "Law school, huh? You sure you're in the right car, son?" And he laughed, not meanly, casually, the laugh of someone who has never considered that the observation might not be innocent. The deputy walked back to his cruiser, ran the plates, sat for 22 minutes. Marcus did not move. He sat with his hands on the wheel of his mother's car, and he breathed slowly and carefully with the deliberate rhythm of a young man learning in real time the specific discipline his life was going to require of him. The deputy came back. No ticket, no explanation. Just a wave and he was gone. Marcus drove 2 miles, pulled onto the gravel shoulder, put the car in park. He sat there for 4 minutes. He did not cry. What was happening in his chest was not sadness exactly. It was more like a decision arriving, a clarity about the shape his life needed to take and the reasons it needed to take that shape. He was going to learn this system, not around it, not beside it. He was going to learn it so completely, so deeply down to its foundations and its precedents and its power structures that no version of that deputy, no version of what had just happened on Route 30 would ever again have the capacity to touch him in the place it had just touched him. He pulled the casebook onto his lap, found his page, and kept reading. The second memory arrived in the back of the cruiser in the dark, and it came not as pain but as something close to confirmation. He was 49 years old, a Tuesday night in February, sitting in his home office at 2 a.m. going over his prepared statement for his Senate confirmation hearing the following day. The appointment to the federal bench, 26 years of work building toward it, the public defender years, the appellate practice, the decade as an assistant U.S. attorney, the reputation built one case at a time through the compounded weight of being relentlessly present in rooms where black men were not expected to be. His phone rang at 2:07 a.m. The voice on the other end was controlled and deliberate. The voice of someone who had thought carefully about what they wanted to say. They told Marcus he should withdraw his nomination. They said a black man in that seat was wrong, against the order of things. They said they knew things about him. They said they knew people. They said if he proceeded, they would make it ugly, they would find something, and if they could not find something, they would make something, and either way, it would stick. Marcus listened to every word. He let the voice finish completely. When it stopped, he said one sentence quietly, without emotion, in the tone of a man conveying information he believes to be accurate. He said, "I'll see you in the morning." He hung up, turned off the lamp, went to bed, and slept well. The sleep of a man who has made peace with his own position in the world and does not require anonymous voices in the night to define it for him. The following morning he was confirmed 67-33. He had never told a single person about that phone call, not his wife, not his clerk, not a friend or a colleague. Some things you carry privately, not out of shame, but because they belong to you, to the interior architecture of who you are, and that is exactly where they are most useful. The cruiser turned into the parking lot of the Crestwood Heights Police Department at 10:51 p.m., and Marcus felt the shift in the ride and came back fully to the present, to the aching shoulder, the tight steel, the smell of disinfectant and old coffee. Stafford hauled him through the back door and into the building. The fluorescent lights were harsh. Marcus blinked once behind his glasses and took in the room, the raised booking desk, the polished floor, the hum of a vending machine somewhere. And behind the desk a man clearly approaching 60 who looked up from his paperwork with the reflexive attention of someone who processes information before consciously deciding to. Sergeant Roy Callahan was 57 years old, 29 years with Crestwood Heights PD. He was a large man, gray buzz-cut reading glasses perpetually sliding down his nose, and the general bearing of someone who has seen enough in his career that very little surprises him, but who retains somehow a functional moral compass that institutional habit has not completely overwritten. He looked at the man being moved toward his desk, and something in his experienced, practiced assessment of people registered a dissonance immediately. The man was in his 60s. Silver hair, very expensive overcoat soaked through blood on the left cuff. Posture immaculate despite the handcuffs. And when he reached the counter and Stafford released his shoulder, he straightened to his full height and looked at Callahan with eyes that were completely unusually and somewhat unnerving in their calm. Stafford delivered his summary with visible cheerfulness. Prowling the Millbrook sector, refused a lawful order, resisted arrest, probable connection to the burglary ring. Cell 2. No phone call until he is finished with paperwork. He tossed Marcus's belongings onto the counter. The briefcase, the keys, the Waterman pen, the leather notebook. Callahan said quietly, "That's not how the phone call works, Brian." Stafford waved it off and disappeared down the hallway. And then it was just Roy Callahan and Marcus Webb alone at the booking desk under the fluorescent lights. Sergeant Marcus said. His voice was composed and direct. "I need you to pay close attention to what you're about to find." Callahan worked through the inventory the way he always did, methodically, without rushing. He logged the briefcase, the keys, the fountain pen, the notebook. He picked up the wallet and worked through the contents. Driver's license, Marcus E. Webb, 64 years old. The photograph matching the man across the counter precisely. He wrote down the name. It felt at the edge of his awareness faintly familiar. The way a name does when you have encountered it somewhere you cannot quite retrieve. 3 bills, a platinum card, a health insurance card. He logged them. He reached into the back compartment of the wallet for any remaining items. His fingers closed on something heavier than a card. Stiffer, with the specific texture of embossed leather, the leather of official things. He pulled it out. It was a trifold federal credential case, the kind issued by federal agencies, the kind that is a little too thick for an ordinary wallet, but too important to leave anywhere else. Callahan opened it. The overhead fluorescent light caught the gold of the shield. His eyes moved to the laminated card beneath it. The text was printed in the clear, formal, unambiguous typography of a federal document designed to convey one thing to anyone who reads it. This is not a matter that admits interpretation. United States District Court. The Honorable Marcus E. Webb. Article 3. The Department of Justice seal pressed into tamper-proof government laminate. Callahan's hands went very still. He looked from the gold shield to the photograph on the credential card. He looked from the photograph to the face of the man standing on the other side of the counter, the silver hair, the wire-frame glasses, the soaked overcoat with blood on the cuffs, the absolute composure, the eyes that had been waiting with the patience of a man who knew precisely what he was waiting for this exact moment. "Oh, Lord," Callahan said, very quietly, in the voice of a man who understands instantly and completely the full dimension of what he is holding. "The briefcase on your counter," Marcus said, his voice entirely, even contains the sentencing documents and case annotations for a federal fraud proceeding. I am scheduled to continue presiding over tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Those documents were seized from my vehicle without probable cause, without my consent, and without any legal basis whatsoever. In the break room behind the hallway, Officer Travis Bowman had put down his container of leftover pasta. He had typed the name Marcus E. Webb into a search engine on his phone about 15 minutes earlier, right after Stafford had boasted openly in the break room about the pretextual lane violation and the plan to push for felony charges. The first result had been a Washington Post profile, a formal portrait, judicial robes, a headline describing Marcus Webb as one of the most formidable federal judges currently serving on the American bench. Bowman had stared at his phone for a long time. He set it in his pocket now and walked quietly toward the booking desk. Callahan's hands were trembling slightly. He had been a cop for 29 years. He understood the hierarchy of power with the clarity of someone whose career had been built inside it. A patrol officer was the base. A federal judge was something else entirely. A sitting Article III judge with lifetime tenure and the authority to issue injunctions that could shut down an entire police department had a level of power that was not comparable to anything else in that building. He reached instinctively for the override keys to release Marcus immediately, to process him out, to make it stop getting worse. "Do not touch those keys, Sergeant." Callahan stopped. The command in Marcus's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Marcus looked at him steadily. He described what had happened on Millbrook Road. The pretextual stop. The fabricated lane violation. The word used at the car window. The illegal search. The assault. The deliberate over-tightening of the handcuffs. The head impact with the door frame. The threat of the DA call in the concrete box. He described each of these things in the precise, sequential, dispassionate language of a man who has spent 12 years taking factual records and understands exactly what makes them useful. Then he said the thing that Callahan had been sensing but had not yet fully processed. "If I were any other black man from the city," Marcus said, "if I did not have a federal credential in that wallet, I would be in cell 2 right now, alone, facing fabricated felony charges, no phone call, no recourse, and no one in this building would be looking at me the way you are looking at me right now." He paused. "I am not leaving. You are going to call Chief Holt right now. Wake him if necessary, bring him to this precinct, and not say a single word to Officer Stafford until the chief arrives. Is that understood, Sergeant?" Roy Callahan was 57 years old and 2 years from a pension. He looked at the gold federal shield on his booking desk. He looked at the blood on Marcus Webb's wrists. He looked at the credential photograph of a 64-year-old man who had been dragged out of his car in the rain and handcuffed and threatened, and called a word that no man should be called by an officer that this department had created and shielded and excused for 9 years. He picked up the phone. Not because he was afraid of the consequences of not picking it up, though the consequences were enormous. He picked it up because he was 57 years old, and he was not going to end his career having looked at this and chosen silence. At precisely 11:03 p.m., Chief Raymond Holt was asleep when his phone vibrated on the nightstand. He was 54 years old, 6 years as chief of Crestwood Heights PD. He had gotten there through a combination of political acuity and genuine competence that allowed him to manage wealthy residents, demanding city council members, and the egos of his senior officers simultaneously and without visible strain. He answered on the second vibration. Callahan's voice had a quality underneath its control that Holt recognized immediately as the sound of someone managing something difficult. He said there was a situation at the precinct. He said Stafford had brought someone in on a Millbrook stop. He said the name, Marcus Webb. Holt sat up in bed. The name hit him before his conscious mind had fully processed it, a precognitive alarm. Because Holt had been in the regional law enforcement and legal community for 25 years. He knew who Marcus Webb was, the way you know the names of storms that have changed the landscape. Webb was the judge who had dismantled 2 organized crime operations from the federal bench without flinching. Webb was the judge who had held a state's attorney in contempt in open court in front of the man's own staff for submitting doctored evidence. Webb was in the vocabulary of everyone who worked in the justice system in this region. Someone you did not make mistakes in front of, and emphatically someone you did not make mistakes against. Handcuffed, Callahan said. Head impact. Wrists bleeding. Body cam was powered down. Holt was already on his feet. He threw a winter coat over his pajama shirt, shoved his bare feet into the first shoes he could find. He was in his car in under 4 minutes, driving toward the precinct with the focused, cold urgency of a man who understands he is not racing to prevent something. He is racing to see how much of what cannot be undone might still somehow be mitigated. Meanwhile, back in this break room, Stafford had changed into a dry shirt and was pouring himself a fresh cup of coffee. He was feeling genuinely good about the night. He recapped it for Bowman with the easy pleasure of a man who considers himself to have handled something correctly. He described the stop openly, the fabricated lane violation, the escalation, the physical compliance, all of it without lowering his voice. He mentioned the DA call in the morning, the felony intimidation angle, the county lockup plan for the weekend. He was cheerful, confident, entirely at ease. Bowman set down his pasta container. He asked quietly if Stafford had looked at all of the man's identification, not just the license. Stafford looked at him with the mild, tolerant contempt of a 9-year veteran for a 28-year-old who is about to say something naive. He said he ran the license and it came back clean. He said the guy was some kind of court clerk who thought his vocabulary made him important. Bowman said nothing more. He picked up his container, set it in the sink, and walked out of the break room toward the booking desk. Stafford finished his coffee, tossed the cup, and headed for the booking desk, expecting to collect his paperwork and end the night on a high note. The front doors opened. Chief Raymond Holt came through the glass entrance of the Crestwood Heights Police Department at 11:19 p.m., winter coat over a plaid pajama shirt, bare feet in loafers, face the color of a man who has spent a 20-minute car ride understanding the full dimension of something catastrophic, breathing hard. Eyes moving across the room with the rapid, desperate scan of someone looking for what cannot be looked away from. He found Marcus Webb sitting calmly on the wooden bench against the wall, a plastic cup of water in his hand. Callahan's credential case open on the booking desk beside him. The coffee cup slipped from Stafford's fingers somewhere in the hallway. It hit the granite floor and shattered, and the sound of it in that particular silence was remarkably, almost poetically loud. Holt crossed the room directly to Marcus and did something that 20 years of command authority made genuinely difficult for him. He removed his hat. Judge Pendleton Holt began, and then caught himself immediately visibly rattled by his own error. Judge Webb, Your Honor, I cannot begin to apologize. This is a catastrophic failure of my department. I am profoundly and deeply sorry. Marcus did not stand. He looked at Holt with the measuring eyes of a man who has heard apologies delivered by people who were sorry they had been caught, rather than sorry for what they had done, and who can tell the difference. He said nothing immediately. Stafford appeared at the hallway entrance. He had been walking toward the booking desk when the doors opened, and he had stopped in the hallway, confused by the urgency of Holt's entrance, confused by the pajamas, confused by the posture of the man he had worked for 6 years, bending slightly toward a suspect on a wooden bench. He stood with his hands at his sides, trying to read the room, trying to understand what he was looking at. Chief Stafford said. His voice had a puzzled, almost boyish quality. What's going on? Who is this guy? Holt turned toward the hallway. The apology vanished from his face. It was replaced by something that was purely and entirely the expression of a man calculating survival. Shut your mouth, Brian Holt said. Chief, come on. What's happening? I had a legitimate stop. The guy was swerving. He refused a lawful order. The lane violation was real. I followed procedure. Holt's voice went to a register that silenced the room. Your weapon and your badge, right now, both of them. On that desk, Chief. I have 9 years on this force. I have cleared hundreds of stops. You're going to take the word of a suspect over your own officer, your weapon," Holt said again. "And your badge. Now." The duty belt hit the floor with a heavy metallic clatter. Stafford's hands were shaking as he unclipped the badge from his chest. He held it for one suspended moment, the silver shield of the Crestwood Heights Police Department. Then he set it on the booking desk, right beside the trifold federal credential case with its gold DOJ shield. The two objects sat on the booking desk in the fluorescent light, the local badge and the federal seal. And for a moment, everyone in the room looked at them, and the contrast was so complete, so absolute, so entirely without ambiguity, that no one said anything for a full 3 seconds. Bowman had been standing quietly at the edge of the booking area. He looked at the two objects on the desk. He looked at Stafford. He took one step forward and placed his hand on the counter in front of Callahan. He said in a clear, steady voice that he had heard everything Officer Stafford said in the break room. The admission of the pretextual lane violation, the plan to push for felony charges, the county lockup strategy. He said he would put all of it in writing, signed, dated, and submitted as a formal witness statement. Stafford stared at him. "You're kidding me, Bowman. You're going to do this?" Bowman looked at him. "I already did it," he said. "I typed it up on my phone while you were talking." Holt moved immediately toward the next phase of what his instinct told him was damage containment. He said he would personally drive Marcus home. He said there would be no record of the arrest. He said Stafford would be suspended without pay, full internal review, no stone left unturned. He said it with the fluency of a man who has promised internal processes before and knows how to make them sound definitive. Marcus stood. He stood slowly at his full height, and he looked at Chief Raymond Holt for a long moment. Then he looked past him, down the hallway, to where Derek Stafford stood with his duty belt on the floor and his badge on the booking desk. And what was on Marcus's face as he looked at Stafford was not triumph, not hatred, not even anger in any form that Stafford would have recognized. It was something older. The look of a man who has been here before many times in many forms and who has spent 40 years deciding what to do about it. He turned back to Holt. "My name is Marcus Elias Webb," he said. "I am a sitting Article III federal judge of the United States District Court, appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by the United States Senate. The briefcase that Officer Stafford placed on that counter without my consent contains sentencing documents for a federal fraud proceeding I am scheduled to preside over at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And in approximately 60 minutes, the FBI Civil Rights Division is going to be standing in this building." He let that land. Then he continued. "You do not have my consent for a quiet ride home, Chief Holt. You do not have my consent for an internal review conducted behind these walls by the same institution that dismissed 12 complaints in 9 years. What you are going to do right now is call the FBI Field Office request Special Agent Dana Carver of the Civil Rights Division and have her on her way to this precinct within the hour." He looked at Stafford directly for the first time since the booking room. "Officer Stafford, you told me on Millbrook Road to remember who I was talking to. I want you to think about who you were talking to. I want you to remember the specific words you used, the concrete box, the 3 years, the DA call, the word you chose at my car window, because every one of those words is now evidence in a federal civil rights investigation, and there is not a single thing you can do about that." He turned away from Stafford. He did not look at him again. Holt, whose primary instinct at every point in the evening had been self-preservation, picked up the phone. "Now, before we get to what happened next, if this story has you gripping your seat right now, we want to ask you to do one thing. Hit the subscribe button on our channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Because what is coming in the next few minutes is going to change everything you thought you knew about how this night ends. Stay right here. Special Agent Dana Carver arrived at the Crestwood Heights Police Department at 12:47 a.m. with 2 agents and the specific unhurried efficiency of someone who has processed enough civil rights violations to move through the initial stages without needing to stop and recalibrate. She was 48 years old, 18 years in the FBI's Civil Rights Division. She had the particular quality of certain professionals who carry significant authority lightly, not because they are casual about it, but because they have fully internalized it and no longer need to perform it. She bypassed the booking desk entirely and went directly to Marcus. She looked at his wrists, at the deep purple contusions and the dried blood where the steel had pressed into the bone. Her jaw tightened in a way that was brief and controlled and communicated exactly what she thought. She asked if he was all right. He said he was bruised but functional. She nodded and turned to Holt. She announced federal jurisdiction. Evidence lockdown on all digital systems. Dispatch logs, body cam footage, dash cam recordings. The server room sealed immediately with her agents at the door. She asked where the officer was. Holt directed her down the hallway. Callahan pulled up the dash cam footage on the wall monitor. Then he hesitated. "The body cam file," he said. "It's empty." Officer Stafford powered it down manually before he exited the cruiser. There was a very specific silence after this. Down the hallway in the place where he had been told to wait, Stafford heard those words and felt something loosen slightly in his chest. A flicker of something close to hope. Without body cam audio of the specific words, without the racial slur on clear recording, without the specific threat, maybe it becomes a competing account. Maybe it survives. Agent Carver let him have the flicker for exactly as long as it took her to unzip her briefcase. "Chief Holt," she said, "are you familiar with the DOJ Fleet Modernization Grant that your city accepted and implemented 8 months ago?" Holt said they had upgraded the vehicle fleet. "Yes." "The new Axon system." Carver nodded. She said that as a standard non-optional component of federal fleet grants, distributed after 2021, the Axon fleet system included a tamper-resistant redundancy protocol. The moment a light bar was activated on a grant-funded vehicle, the dual microphone array built into the cruiser interior began recording automatically and uploading in real time to an encrypted federal cloud server. That server was accessible only to the DOJ Office of Inspector General and the FBI Civil Rights Division. The local department's IT staff had no access to it. No one in this building could delete it, overwrite it, or disable it under any circumstances. She paused. Even if the officer powers down his primary body camera, she said the cruiser's system continues recording from the moment the lights go on. It was designed precisely for situations like the one we are currently investigating. She placed her tablet on the booking counter and connected it to the wall monitor. The room went entirely quiet. The recording began with the moment Stafford's lights went on behind the Cadillac. The forward-facing camera showed the dark Navy car pulling smoothly onto the shoulder perfectly, without hesitation. And then the audio came in, clear and close and mercilessly detailed, capturing every word from the moment Stafford stepped out of his vehicle. They heard Marcus's voice, measured, precise, legally exact, composed throughout in a way that made the contrast with what came next almost unbearable to listen to. And they heard Stafford, the fabricated violations, the escalating contempt, the word used at the car window casual and deliberate, and landing in the silence of that recording with a weight that made 2 of the officers in the room look at the floor. The threat, every word of it, concrete box, 3 years, city trash, the DA call. All of it delivered with the confident ease of a man who expected to never be heard. They heard the wet thud of Marcus's head against the door frame. The recording ended. Nobody in that room said anything for 4 seconds. 4 full seconds of silence in which the weight of what had just played in that precinct settled over everyone present like something physical. Carver disconnected the tablet. She handed it to one of her agents without looking at Stafford. She said, "Place Officer Stafford under federal arrest. 18 United States Code Section 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Read him his Miranda rights. Document any statement he makes. Handle any resistance appropriately." 2 agents moved down the hallway. Stafford's voice, when it came, was not the voice of the man who had driven through Crestwood Heights that night, with 9 years of unchecked authority behind him. It was smaller, much smaller, stripped of the only architecture that had ever made him feel large. "I'm a cop," he said. "Chief? Please. Chief. You can't let them do this. Chief." The words came from down the hall and got quieter. Then there was a sound brief and not gentle. Then the distinctive, metallic, irreversible click of federal handcuffs closing. Then silence. Marcus sat on the wooden bench and did not move and did not speak. And in the quality of his stillness, there was something that was not satisfaction and was not relief, but was something simpler and more fundamental. The recognition that the machinery he had spent his life working within had, in this particular instance, on this particular wet night, worked. The precinct in the hour that followed had the quality of a room that has experienced something it will not recover from. Not because of what had happened, but because of the full understanding arriving slowly in every person still standing in that room of what had been happening for a long time. Carver's agents were in the server room. The dispatch supervisor cooperated immediately, pulling logs, providing access codes with the rapid, careful compliance of someone who understands that the only available strategy at this point is transparency. Holt sat in his office with the door closed, and the fact of the closed door communicated everything it needed to communicate. Bowman came to the booking desk. He was 28 years old, and he had just watched a 9-year veteran he had been taught to defer to get arrested by federal agents in the hallway of his own precinct, and the combination of things he was feeling was complicated and real and not entirely comfortable. But he came to the desk. He stood in front of Marcus and said simply that he had typed up his witness statement on his phone and would submit it in any format required. "I heard every word he said in that break room," Bowman said. "The lane violation was fabricated. He said so himself. He admitted it while he was laughing. I should have walked out of that room and said something sooner. I didn't. That's on me." Marcus looked at him. "That took something," he said. "I want you to know that." Roy Callahan stood at his desk, not booking anyone, just present in the room. He looked at Marcus, and Marcus looked at him, and something passed between them that did not require language. The mutual recognition of two men who understood what the night had required and what it had cost and what it was worth. Marcus finally accepted the dry towel that Bowman offered. He draped it over his shoulders, picked up his cup of water, and waited. Carver drove Marcus to his house herself. His Cadillac had been secured and driven to his address by a second agent. It was already in the driveway when they arrived. The normalcy of seeing it there clean and intact and parked exactly where it belonged was unexpectedly disorienting. She asked if he needed medical attention. He said he would see his doctor in the morning, and he meant it. She asked in the quiet of the car at his curb why he had not simply identified himself on the shoulder of Millbrook Road. Marcus looked out the passenger window at the wet street and the lamplight and the ordinary sleeping stillness of his neighborhood. He said that the law should function identically for a 64-year-old federal judge and for a 25-year-old man driving home from a night shift. And if it only works correctly for the person who can produce the right credential, it does not actually work correctly at all. He said he had needed to experience it completely without protection in order to speak about it completely. He said the shield is not what makes the law work. The law has to work before the shield comes out. Tonight, it did not. Carver was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is the clearest explanation I have ever heard for why you ended up on that bench." They sat in silence for another few seconds. Marcus thanked her, opened the door, and walked up to his house through the wet, dark, ordinary night. By 6:15 the following morning, Rachel Simmons's footage had been shared across 3 platforms a combined 19,000 times. She had not yet woken up and did not know this. She had uploaded it the previous night with a caption that said, "Only something about this felt very wrong, and I think people should see it." The clip was 18 seconds long. In those 18 seconds, you could see in the line of the man's body and the particular quality of his stillness, even as he was being shoved something that a significant number of people recognized immediately and personally. Leo Garza's Instagram Live, 40 viewers, when recorded, had been shared and reclipped and captioned, and had reached approximately 250,000 views by 8 in the morning. The people sharing it did not know who the man was, only what they were looking at, which was enough. When Marcus's identity was confirmed by a regional newspaper at 9:45 that morning, the story changed register entirely. National networks led with it at noon. The dashcam audio released through official channels by early afternoon played on every available platform. And the specific quality of Stafford's voice on that recording, the casual confidence of it, the rehearsed certainty, the word delivered like an afterthought, landed on the public ear with the impact of something that confirms rather than reveals. Something people recognized because they had been carrying the knowledge of it for a long time and had simply been waiting for the evidence. Mayor of Crestwood Heights held a press conference at 3 that afternoon. She announced that Chief Holt had submitted his resignation, effective immediately, that the city welcomed the DOJ civil rights investigation with full transparency and complete cooperation, and that the city council had approved an emergency motion to implement independent oversight of all police stops within the municipality. She said the word accountability 7 times in a 12-minute statement. Stafford was formally charged within 48 hours. Deprivation of rights under color of law under federal statute, obstruction of justice, aggravated assault committed under color of authority. His union-appointed attorney filed a motion to suppress the Axon redundancy audio. The motion was denied. The DOJ civil rights audit of the Crestwood Heights PD, ordered as part of the federal consent decree, examined every arrest Stafford had made in the previous 6 years. Investigators found 17 prior cases involving Black and Latino drivers on the Millbrook Road corridor, where Stafford's arrest reports contained procedural patterns and justification language nearly identical to what he had used against Marcus. Pretextual stop reason, failure to maintain lane, suspicious vehicle behavior, escalation to physical compliance, fabricated resistance narrative. Of those 17 cases, 9 individuals were still serving sentences. Their cases were immediately flagged for emergency review. In none of the 17 had a formal complaint been escalated beyond the precinct level. In 16 of the 17 internal review records indicated the complaint had been categorized as resolved, no action required within 5 business days of filing. 6 months later, the federal courthouse, the building where Marcus had ruled for 12 years. He did not preside over Stafford's trial. He was the star witness. He sat in the gallery until called, wearing a charcoal suit, his silver hair trimmed close wire-frame glasses precisely in place. Posture, the posture of a man who has spent 12 years sitting at the front of rooms like this one, and who understands their weight and does not flinch from it. When he entered the witness stand, the room went quiet in a particular way. Not the silence of fear, the silence of recognition. Prosecutor Neil Okafor led him through the events of that October night with the methodical care of a man building something designed to last. Marcus answered each question in the same unhurried, precise way he had answered Stafford's questions on Millbrook Road. The facts were enough. They did not need decoration. Okafor reached the question he had been building toward. He asked when the defendant threatened to place him in a federal holding facility for a period of 3 years on fabricated charges. What did Marcus feel in that moment? The room went very quiet. The gallery leaned slightly forward. Marcus turned his head and found Derek Stafford at the defense table. Stafford was looking at his hands. He did not look up when Marcus looked at him. And that inability to hold the gaze of the man he had handcuffed in the rain was more eloquent than anything he could have said. Marcus looked back at the prosecutor. His voice was even and clear and carried to every corner of the room without being raised. He said he had not feared for his life. He said he had known even in the back of that cruiser in the rain that the truth would eventually surface. He said the fear he carried from that night, the thing that woke him occasionally in the weeks after, was not about himself. It was about the absolute certainty that if he had been a 23-year-old driving that car, if he had been a man working a second shift, if he had been any black man on that road without 40 years of credentials and institutional weight behind him, he would not be a witness in this courtroom. He would be finishing the second year of a 3-year sentence in a concrete cell because a man with a badge had decided to put him there. He said the defendant's actions on Millbrook Road were not an aberration. They were the behavior of a man who had been doing exactly this to people who had no recourse for years, because the institution around him had decided 12 times over that continuity was more important than accountability. The question was not what Derek Stafford deserved. The question was what the 17 people whose cases were in the audit file deserved. The question was what the law owed to everyone for whom that night on Millbrook Road ended the way Derek Stafford intended it to end. He looked at Okafor. He said, "I think you have what you need." The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 51 minutes, guilty on all 3 counts. Judge Patricia Stowe looked at Derek Stafford across the courtroom with the direct, measured gaze of someone who has something to say and intends to say it clearly. She said he had been entrusted with a badge and a weapon and the authority of the law, and he had used those things not to protect the public, but to terrorize it. Not because he felt threatened, but because he felt powerful. And the distinction between those two things was the whole of what this trial had been about. 78 months in a federal correctional facility, followed by 10 years of supervised release, remanded immediately to custody. The handcuffs went on at the defense table. That clean metallic double click moved through the room and was felt by everyone in it, a sound carrying in its specific resonance the echo of another set of handcuffs on a dark, wet shoulder on a Wednesday night 6 months ago. Stafford was walked out through the side door. In the back row of the gallery, Marcus Webb stood. He buttoned his jacket. He walked out through the tall oak doors into the afternoon. Derek Stafford served his sentence every month of it, and no appeal succeeded. Chief Holt resigned and never returned to law enforcement. Of the 9 individuals whose convictions were flagged in the audit of Stafford's prior arrests, 5 had their convictions overturned, and 4 had their sentences commuted in full. Among them was a 27-year-old named Darnell Price, who had spent 26 months in county correctional for an obstruction charge built on a Millbrook Road stop that Stafford had fabricated 2 years before Marcus Webb ever drove through Crestwood Heights. Darnell walked out on a Thursday morning in March and stood in the parking lot in the thin spring sunlight, breathing the air of a man who has been returned something that should never have been taken. He did not know Marcus Webb's name. He had been told only that a federal audit had found problems with his arrest and that the conviction could not stand. He thought about calling his mother, and then he did, and she was crying before he finished his first sentence. The federal consent decree over the Crestwood Heights Police Department ran for 5 years and produced changes that were documented quarterly by an independent oversight board. Pretextual stops on the Millbrook Road corridor dropped 71% in the first year. The complaint review process was transferred entirely out of internal control and assigned to an independent civilian board with subpoena authority. Travis Bowman transferred to a neighboring department and was promoted to detective within 18 months. Roy Callahan retired on schedule quietly, without ceremony, and on his last day he stopped by the office of a civil rights attorney in the city and left an envelope containing a handwritten account of everything he had observed and done nothing about over 29 years. Using the precedent established in this case, attorneys filed similar federal civil rights actions against police departments in 3 neighboring jurisdictions over the following 2 years. 2 of those actions resulted in consent decrees of their own. Marcus received a letter 6 weeks after the trial from a man who signed his name only as D. Price. The letter said he had heard that something had changed because of a judge who refused to stay quiet, and that the change had reached him in a way he had not expected, and that he did not know how to say what he wanted to say, except that it mattered in a way that was very hard to put into words, and that he was trying anyway. Marcus read the letter twice at his desk in the early morning before the day's caseload arrived. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in the back compartment of his wallet in the same place where the federal credential case had always been, and he went to work. He returned to the bench the way he always returned to it, with the knowledge that the work was long and the cases were real, and the people on both sides of every proceeding deserved the full attention of a mind that had not given up on the possibility that justice, if you fought for it carefully and consistently, and without stopping, was something the law could actually produce. Some mornings before the first case was called, he would sit in the quiet of the empty courtroom and be aware of his wrists, long since healed. The memory of the cold steel had not faded, but it had simply become one more thing that was true about his life. One more thing from the shoulder of Route 30 and the 2 a.m. phone call and the rainy shoulder of Millbrook Road that had not broken him and had not diminished him and had not changed the fundamental shape of what he was, which was a man who had decided at 21 on the side of a dark highway in Ohio that he was going to learn the law completely and hold it up with both hands and refuse to let it be used as a weapon against the people it was built to protect. The steel had been cold, the rain had been relentless, and Derek Stafford had been certain, in the way of men who have never faced consequences, that he had the power to define what Marcus Webb was. What he did not understand was that the man standing in the rain on Millbrook Road had been defining himself for 40 years before that cruiser ever left the parking lot. And the definition had been set in something far more permanent than anything a badge and a set of handcuffs could reach. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone you know or something you have seen, then do this right now. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And subscribe to our channel because we bring you stories like this one every week. Stories where the truth fights back, where dignity holds the line, and where justice, when it finally arrives completely. Leave a comment below and tell us what would you have done in Marcus Webb's shoes that night on Millbrook Road. We read every single one. See you in the next story.